everyone. I'm calling in from Germany, Duisburg. I've been here for 3 years.
Emily?
Hi, everybody. I'm Emily. I'm calling from Berlin, Germany tonight.
Good. Brooke, where are you calling us from?
I am in Paris, France.
Good. And we have with us Ian Suk or Jason.
Calling from Madrid, Spain.
Welcome, Jason. Tawheeda, where are you calling us from?
Calling from Toronto, Canada.
Great. And Nicole?
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm calling in from Querétaro, Mexico.
Great.
All right, so hi everyone, I'm Aaron calling in from Bratislava, Slovakia. Let's give it another minute or two for our attendees to show up. People are maybe finishing, well, I guess of course it depends on where they are in the world, maybe finishing dinner, finishing lunch, as it were. Let's give it another 2 minutes here. I'm also looking for one or two other speakers. If you are a panelist who for some reason was not able to get your panelist link or find it potentially in your in one of your spam folders or something, please let one of us know via the chat so that we can invite you to be a panelist. Make sure we have all of our speakers here. Maybe. If I just promoted you to panelist and you're not actually a panelist, please let me know. So maybe just another minute here. Anelika, Emily, what would you like? Should we begin, or would you like to another moment? Waiting for one panelist, as I understand it.
Should we give it another minute? Try to find our lost panelists and then start.
On a panel about migration, it makes sense that we're all still traveling and searching. One thing here, and then yeah, we can begin. Shall we get started? I know we have a lot to cover today. I think that, I think that we'll get started, and hopefully he will join when his time to speak comes. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us here, whatever time it is in your part of the world today. We welcome you to the first in a series of immigration-focused events that we're going to be having, and this one is entitled Immigration Reform, Farm Worker, and Dreamer Justice. My name is Aaron Fishbone. I'm the Global Communications Director here at Democrats Abroad, and I'm really delighted to have the honor of kicking off our call today. As many of you probably know, last week, the House passed earlier this week, the House passed two immigration bills, the Dream and Promise Act, H.R. 6, and the Farmworker Modernization Act, H.R. 1603. Now, other speakers will provide you the full picture about immigration reform, but these are really important milestones thanks to the Democratic House that was elected and the Biden-Harris administration advancing key Democratic priorities. And I want to share that Democrats Abroad is still very actively engaged. Even since the election, we remain so hard at work to advance the Democratic priorities. And we are working, so I want to share with you a few other things that we're working on in addition to immigration advocacy. We're working hard on the state level around voting access bills and advocacy related to those voting access bills in Arizona, Texas, New Jersey, and New York. And we have teams hard at work on pushing those to make sure that voting remains open and accessible to many of the residents of those states, as many as possible. We're pushing amendments to protect overseas voters, UOCAVA voters in the Voting Rights Bill, H.R. 1, the For the People's Act, where we have task forces and teams and many people working to promote the Equality Act, H.R. 5, to protect gender identity and sexual orientation as a civil rights protections, and ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment, all things that are so important to all of us as Democrats abroad. And we're also dedicated to immigration reform. It impacts so many people, both at home and abroad. I mean, there's maybe no issue that touches Americans who live overseas as much as this issue. And we all have an immigration or migration story in one way or the other, whether it's ourselves, our spouses, our children, or our friends and family. And it's also a key legislative priority for our Hispanic caucus, who is the premier sponsor of tonight's event. And so thank you so much for organizing all of this. Tonight's event is about raising awareness and building the motivation to take action on these important issues that are going to come up again and again. So tonight's event was organized by the Hispanic Caucus in collaboration with the Democrats Abroad, Global Asian American and Pacific Islander Caucus, the LGBTQ Caucus, the Youth Caucus, as well as co-sponsored by Democrats Abroad Canada, Democrats Abroad Spain, Democrats Abroad Mexico, Democrats Abroad Germany. On this call, we have Monsi Hernandez from the Hispanic Caucus. Hi, Monsi. We have Brooke Burns, who's the Deputy Regional Vice Chair for the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region, also a member of the Hispanic Caucus. We have Daniel James, the newly elected Chair of Democrats Abroad Spain, hopefully here, if not yet. We also have Emily Lines, co-chair of the American Asian Pacific Islander Caucus, and the newly elected Vice Chair of Democrats Abroad Germany. And I would be remiss to also not congratulate Anelika, who is the newly elected Vice Chair of Democrats Abroad Belgium. So congratulations to Emily and to Anelika. Very excited about this kickoff and all the other events that you're going to be organizing and all the other incredible activism you're going to be bringing with you in your leadership roles. I'm sure there's other people on the call who are also newly elected, and that's wonderful as well. But here are our panelists. So look, on a personal note, I just want to say that it is such an honor and such a privilege to be able to launch this event and hear from such committed and passionate activist and crusader. Tawheeda, earlier today, as I was preparing for this, I read your op-ed in the New York Times. Yunsok, I watched a video interview that you gave to one of the video channels, papers in New Jersey. And, from both of you, I understand you did not choose this path. You did not choose this situation, but nonetheless, the way in which you have responded to it, what you're doing, the leadership you're showing, it's really inspiring. And just really, really appreciate that. It's great to see and be with you. The other two, I didn't have a chance to watch too much today, but I watched things they did. And really, really just honored to be here and a part of this, and so excited to have you all joining us at DA. So with that, I want to hand it off to Brooke Burns to introduce the next wave of the event.
Thank you, Aaron. So yes, tonight we have 4 amazing panelists whose individual expertise and experiences are going to give us a better idea of what we can expect, just from the more immediate immigration bills, and then also what we as individuals can do to fight for equity no matter where we are. So we encourage you to make use of the Q&A box and type your questions if you have them, and we'll go over them after the presentations if we have time. So to get us started, we want to give an introduction to the main topic, which is immigration reform, and Monsi Hernandez is going to present that to us. So Monsi.
Thank you, Brooke, and thank you everyone for being here. As Aaron mentioned, immigration reform is a topic we care strongly about, but the actual logistics of the reform are still being determined. But what we do know is that there is a comprehensive immigration reform bill, the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021, which is currently being finalized in numerous committees. And next slide. The bill has a series of proposals that aim to address the root cause of migration, responsibly manage the southern border, and reform the immigrant visa system. It is expected that the bill will not pass intact, which is why we have to remain vigilant and lobby intensively. Just to give you a general idea of what the bill proposes, I'd like to list some of the key changes that it outlines. It provides permanent residence without numerical limits to international students with PhDs in science, technology, engineering, and math fields from the US universities. It increases the diversity green cards from 55,000 to 80,000 each year. It eliminates employment based per country levels. It authorizes employment for asylum applicants who are not detained and whose applications have not been determined to be frivolous. It conducts a study on factors affecting employment opportunities for immigrants and refugees with professional credentials obtained in foreign countries. While we wait for this large immigration reform bill, we currently have 2 bills that have passed the House that focus on 2 important immigrant communities. These are the most pressing to focus on as the language is currently being reviewed by the Senate. The 2 bills, while falling under the umbrella of immigration reform, are separate from the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021. They are the Dream and Promise Act, HR 6, and the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, HR 1603. To outline more about the Dream and Promise Act, we have Brooke Burns.
I need to unmute. Yes, thank you. So the Dream and Promise Act, which just recently passed the House, it proposes canceling the removal proceedings against those who enter the United States as minors and to grant such non-citizens a conditional permanent resident status for 10 years. So this is a key bill for the thousands of dreamers and their families who live in the constant uncertainty and fear of deportation. So we're going to provide more information just about what this bill would mean in their lives and what the experience of dreamers actually are. So for that, we have Tawheeda, Wahabzada, and Unsung or Jason Hong. Tawheeda is the co-founder of Departed Dreamers. She was raised in Carson City, Nevada, though in early 2000, she moved back to Toronto, Canada. So she has a professional experience in international development and has pursued a BA at the University of Nevada, as well as an MA at the University of Texas at Austin. So like many dreamers and many DACA recipients, Tawheeda's hopes were continuously raised and then dashed by this political process. She specifically remembers the optimism of a potential DREAM Act during the first term of the Obama administration. And despite the optimism and a Democratic-controlled House and Senate, the DREAM Act still failed to break the filibuster by 5 votes. So although DACA did grant temporary relief, it was still not enough. And executive actions from the Trump administration put our dreamers in further peril. So Tawheeda, could you tell us more about what this bill would mean to you based on your own experience?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And thank you, Brooke. As Brooke has already mentioned, my name is Tawheeda Wahabzada, and I am currently based in Toronto, Canada. I grew up in Carson City, Nevada since like 1995, and from 2015 to 2020, I lived in Washington, D.C. Overall, I lived in the US for almost 25 years before leaving. And I'm 30, by the way. Before going into detail about the Dream and Promise Act, I wanted to go more into detail about my decision to leave and how that ties to the current legislation. I ultimately made the decision to leave the US as a way to finally reclaim my agency. It was extremely tiring to wait for an idea and to constantly be used as a pawn, and just overall obsessing over the news and progress towards immigration reform or piecemeal reforms. Additionally, with my career in international development, it required a lot of traveling, and under the Trump administration, I wasn't able to travel or grow career-wise. Before the 2016 elections, I remember meeting with Senate staffers where I was told that I was preaching to the crowd and I need to talk to the other side. When I tried talking to the other side, I was dismissed. So those experiences basically made me jaded, along with the continuous failures of the DREAM Act. And those essentially like cemented my decision to leave, even if it meant leaving my community. Out of frustration, I published an op-ed on the New York Times detailing the consequences of leaving the US. And the main consequence is being barred from entering the US for 10 years. I left the US over a year ago on February 2020, and it was a very difficult decision. Overall, I don't have any regrets, but I do have to say that the global pandemic did worsen the emotions of being separated from my community and from the loved ones. With the Biden administration, I'm being cautiously optimistic of some sort of DREAM Act passing in the Senate. I'm not sure it'll be the actual Dream and Promise Act or some sort of variation of it. In its current form, the Dream and Promise Act is already facing criticism from the opposite end of the aisle, and it will certainly face an uphill battle in a split Senate, especially with the filibuster. However, regardless of the battle, it is absolutely worth the fight to preserve all, if not most, of the text of the House version of the Dream and Promise Act. Overall, the Dream and Promise Act provides a streamlined pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients. And it also provides a pathway to citizenships for dreamers who don't qualify or who didn't qualify for DACA, but have arrived in the US before the age of 18. For example, I'm not sure if you know the journalist Jose Antonio Vargas, who is a Pulitzer-winning journalist. In 2011, he wrote an essay for the New York Times where he publicly revealed his status as an undocumented immigrant and as a dreamer. The next year, when DACA was introduced, he didn't qualify for DACA as he was aged out. Based on the current text of the Dream and Promise Act, he would be eligible to apply. For the most part, those who qualify for the Dream and Promise Act will start out with a conditional green card before obtaining a full permanent residency. And based on the text itself, the conditional green card lasts up to 10 years. This wasn't mentioned earlier in the event, but sorry, let me close my Skype because I'm getting notifications. This wasn't mentioned earlier in the event, but the Dream and Promise Act also provides a pathway to citizenship for TPS holders. So basically, the Dream and Promise Act addresses both dreamers and TPS holders. And based on the current text, TPS holders can apply for full permanent residency without any conditions. And what's even more interesting about the current version of the Dream and Promise Act is that it has a waiver of physical presence for DACA or dreamers who left on or after January 20th, 2017. That is the day of Trump's inauguration day. This provision would give dreamers who left, such as Monsi, Jason, and myself, and many others, the opportunity to apply for the waiver and to apply for the Dream and Promise Act. Overall, the Dream and Promise Act is an incredible and fair bill, yet the bill is already facing criticism that it could be dead on arrival, or that it is too lax. We certainly know that this bill will face an uphill battle in the Senate. If a different version of the DREAM Act passes, there will still be issues within the reconciliation process by hashing out both the House and the Senate versions. And overall, this leads me to asking a lot of questions. How will the Senate Democrats cave into Republican demands? If the Senate passes their version of the DREAM Act, will they include provisions in the House version? Will they also include TPS? Either way, it is definitely worth continuing to pressure our Senate Democrats in preserving the original text of the Dream and Promise Act. Thank you. That's on my end.
Well, thank you for that. And this is Daniel from Barcelona, and sorry for being a little bit tardy, but really appreciate your update and what you had to say. We're going to move on to another person who lives here in Spain, Jason Hong. Jason is an ex-DACA recipient from New York and New Jersey and moved to Madrid back in 2019 to pursue a master's degree in business administration and a master's in business analytics at big data at the IE Business School. And then I actually had to look up something on Jason because I didn't know what it was. That's how far this guy is going to go. It was SAAS, and just amazing what kind of education he's got. Jason just finished his graduate degree and has launched 2 startups, one in Miami, with the U.S. co-founder, and the other in Madrid. He's co-founded together with our prior speaker a group on social media to gather other dreamers and DACA recipients who left the country to provide a personal and professional support group for those who are starting a new chapter of life in a foreign environment. He is currently advocating for removing the temporary and permanent ban of inadmissibility to help these dreamers reconnect with their friends and families who are still in the United States. So Jason, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Daniel. First, I would like to open this by wishing for the well-being of you and all your loved ones. And it's been over a year since the world was introduced to COVID-19, and we all experienced economic stalemate, record high unemployment rate, change in our social norm, change in our environment, and travel restrictions, as well as many other types of restrictions, which all helped in elevating the sense of insecurity and uncertainty. by an unforeseen situation that was forced upon all of our lives. And it affects every fiber of our daily lives, both physically and psychologically. Ironically, however, I think it also fuels a stronger sense of hope and faith. And in many ways, this in many ways reflects what dreamers go through on a daily basis. Being a dreamer is not just about being undocumented immigrants. It is about a diverse group of individuals who has to deal with all of these kind of problems throughout their entire life. And worse yet, without a fault of their own. My name is Eun-Seok Hong, and I'm Korean-American ex-DACA recipient from New Jersey and New York, who have moved to Madrid, Spain back in August 2019 to pursue dual degrees in business school. I've immigrated to the United States back in 2001, and when I was 10 years old, and at the time, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. My father stayed in Korea for his business, so my mom raised my sister and I alone. But we admit that both of my parents definitely underestimate the process of obtaining a permanent residency with a bit of a bad luck. And after several years of relentless effort, their process failed, and my mom officially became undocumented, which naturally made me undocumented because I was her underage dependent. And besides the fact that we couldn't visit Korea, the first time I actually understood the consequence of being undocumented was when I was in college. So according to College Board, students are spending on average $133,000 on their tuition. Therefore, most students either apply for financial aid or receive student loans. Many of the dreamers, almost all the dreamers, don't qualify to apply for either options, simply because also not undocumented. Finance was a major difficulty, but it was not the only issue. So most college students apply for an internship during summer vacations, no such privilege for dreamers. Most students get stressed about their job interviews, and companies they want to represent might stress them from the inability to even apply for one. And most are eager to graduate and make a living. I was just concerned about what I can even do after graduation. And considering six-figure investment into education, I realized there was no opportunities for me. Frustration turned into anger, and a sense of hopelessness devoured my whole existence. And for over 4 years in school, I've asked myself, why am I even here? And what are all these for? What am I supposed to do? It was one of the most depressing years of my life. And I remember when President Barack Obama introduced the Diffraction for Child Arrival, also known as DACA, in 2012. It's a temporary 2-year protections for a selected group of young dreamers who leave to legally work, obtain driver license, and pay taxes. And with the help of the DACA status, I went to study abroad in Istanbul, Turkey for 6 months. It allowed me to experience working in financial services, IT project management, SaaS startup, and nonprofit organization. Although this does not offer any pathway to citizenship, it symbolized a sense of freedom, liberty, and opportunity. It allowed hundreds of thousands of young immigrants to step out of the shadows to pursue their dreams. It provided hope that the country, which we have all known in our lives, is finally on its way to accept us as part of the community. Unfortunately, we've all witnessed how fragile it was. September 5th, 2017 is a day which I will never forget. But with just one announcement by the Trump administration, all our lives flipped upside down. I remember going to the work next day, feeling petrified, and my hands were shaking, my mind felt numb, and I couldn't get rid of the sense of fear. All our lives just been taken away by our government. My country was branding and identifying us as thieves, rapists, and garbage. I can still feel the bitterness and suffocation which teared my heart on a daily basis. So I looked at my options. First, stay and blindly wait for Dream Act to pursue master's degree. And third, leave my home and go back to Korea. The first option was the most bitter. For one, the odds of this to happen was extremely slim. And considering my age, where most of my friends and peers are already building their lives and careers, it was extremely difficult to blindly wait for the unknown, which led me with a higher education and leave my home. Leaving my home without any purpose was simply driving at night with a broken headlight. But in combination of having a purpose, I found the combination of going to school and leaving the country found very appealing. So I researched the top tier MBA program abroad and applied for MBA and MBA dual degree program at IE. The day I received my acceptance letter was the moment that I realized my plan to leave was finally in motion. It created a deadline. And it was truly a bittersweet moment. And this level of uncertainties and insecurity should never weigh in for anyone. No one should be placed with this level of restrictions for their lives. And no one should be in a position to make a decision to self-exile. Dream and Promise Act isn't about providing a legal status or paper or documents. It's about giving people their freedom and their humanitarian rights to stretch their wings and pursue their dreams. Today, after completing my 18 months long master's in business administration and big data dual degree program, as a first generation COVID pandemic graduate, I found my passion in entrepreneurship and co-founded 2 startups, one here in Madrid in Spain, and the other one in Miami, Florida. I'm also co-creator of the group Departed Dreamers with a previous speaker, Tawheeda, in hopes to find others like ourselves to have initiated a new chapter of their lives elsewhere in the world to provide a personal and professional support group. Dream Act has been a long overdue. For over 18 years of trying to pass a Dream Act, I can't even imagine the number of talents that had delivered, its impacts which it might have had, and sense of gratitude, appreciation, and sincerity from every party, which could have flourished into even greater benefits to the overall society. Dream and Promise Act is the vaccinations that every dreamer needs, and it is an initiative towards a better and stronger community. It allows millions of driven and motivated and passionate individuals to create and leave positive impacts in their own communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Unsuk. That was amazing. Really appreciate you sharing your story. The next bill we want to talk about is the Farm Workforce and Modernization Act. This bill was also passed in the House last week. The bill would legalize hundreds of thousands of undocumented farm workers. They could qualify for 5-year renewable visas, as well as options for permanent legal status, depending on how long they've been in the US. So here to talk to us is Edgar Franks. He's the political director of Familias Unidas por la Justicia. Sorry, my Spanish is not my strong suit. Edgar has worked on a variety of initiatives that led to a greater protections and treatment of farm workers and their families. He will be speaking on the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, along with other initiatives that better assist undocumented and non-citizen agricultural workers. Edgar, the floor is yours.
Hey, hello everyone. My name is Edgar. I'm with Familias Unidas por la Justicia. Been here formally since 2019, but in reality, I was with the union when they first started organizing themselves in 2013. I was, my family is also came from a migrant background. I was originally born in Texas, the second person in my family to be born in the US. And we migrated back and forth since I was born. And my family finally settled here in Washington State, working the fields. So the fight for farm worker rights is something that's near and dear. My family still works. A lot of my friends and peers are still in farm work and still in pretty precarious positions, knowing that majority of farm workers are undocumented and are at risk for deportations or detentions, and a lot of harsh treatment in general in working the farms in Washington and just in general in the United States. So yeah, these last couple of years, even within the context of our union, have been very, very different. Our union was organizing during the rise of Donald Trump and white, whatever you want to call it, white nationalism, white supremacy, xenophobia. But even with some of these obstacles that were faced by the workers, they were still able to win a union contract and be recognized as a union, which is, I think, our union is one of the only farm worker unions that has been founded in the last 30 years in the United States. And one of the interesting, more peculiar, and I think the strong point of our union is that it's made up by indigenous Mexican people that are Mixteco and Triqui from Oaxaca and Guerrero, that don't even speak much Spanish or English. They still speak their native language. So that's kind of a little bit of background about our union. We've seen many variations of immigration reform in the past, with a comprehensive immigration reform of attempts of 2016. And I think the previous one was like in 2012 or something like that, with the Gang of Four in the Senate. However, most of these bills don't really address structural problems or the root problems of what's causing people to migrate in the first place. The Farm Workforce Modernization Act, as we understand it, it's a bill that was drafted up during the Trump administration by a very conservative, right-wing farmer that has a farm here actually in Washington State, in Eastern Washington. His name is Dan Newhouse, and was negotiated without a lot of the consent from farm labor groups from throughout the United States. So this bill, in essence, was negotiated pretty much one-sided, with excluding a lot of the voices from the people that were going to be the most impacted. Some of the, I don't know if you want to call them highlights or kind of more red flags for us, was this notion of E-Verify, or this program of E-Verify, which would automatically put a lot of people out of work. E-Verify is a system that right now employers can opt into to verify your status using your social security number. And if you don't have a social security number or a valid one, you can't work. So E-Verify would be mandatory for the first time ever in the history of the United States throughout the whole industry of agriculture. It's no secret, more than half of the workers in agriculture or in food processing are undocumented. And that's just what it is. So that was immediately a red flag, because no farm worker in their right mind would ever agree to any verify system. Another one is the expansion of a controversial work program here. It's called the H-2A program, guest worker program. And many countries use the H-2A program. I mean, people said from Spain, there's programs like this where they bring in workers from, if you're in Spain, it's usually from like Africa or Eastern Europe. And here it's primarily people from Mexico and Central America. They're brought in under a visa, temporary. They're stuck to one employer, and pretty much they're almost held hostage because they can't go anywhere without the permission of the employer. Sometimes we've had 4 or 5 different cases just in Washington State where employers were taking away passports and limiting movements and surveilling workers. Workers that did try to speak out on the conditions were immediately deported or disciplined or put on a blacklist, so they would never be able to apply for this program again. And the H-2A program also really is beneficial for employers because they get to determine wages and put a cap on it, where usually in farm work, you get paid for what you produce, and some workers are very productive. They're really good because this is what they do. They're professional workers, and they can make sometimes up to $20-$30 an hour. And so if the H-2A program becomes expanded, farmers would be able to cap the wages at significantly low levels. So those are, and one of the problems that we've seen is that how the H-2A program has really caused division within workers. A lot of our, because it's such a controllable workforce, a lot of employers prefer H-2A workers than to, like, say, local workers, because again, you can discipline workers easy. You can just deport them if they speak out. And it's caused this tension between local workers and guest workers. You know, you get this narrative, even though a lot of the domestic workers are immigrants themselves, you start getting this kind of like language of like, oh, these H-2A workers, they came and took our jobs. So it creates this conflict between communities, all for the benefit and the profits of the employer. And these programs, historically, it came from a bracero program that was started in the 1940s during World War II, an agreement with Mexico and the United States. And during the rise of the Farmworker movement in the 60s and 70s, where we got the United Farm Workers, the first union ever of farm workers, guest workers were brought in to bust the union organizing campaign. And that's still being done to this day. So the FarmWorkforce Modernization Act, I think it's not what workers want. You know, worker, if you ask any worker, they'll say they want amnesty. You know, that's it. You know, letting people that worked here 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, like my family. And they deserve something that's, you know, just for all the work that they've done and the sacrifice that they put in. So yeah, we're opposing actually the Workforce Modernization Act because of these big red flags. And, you know, it's a hard position to be in. I know it's not the popular one, but for us, it's the right one because that's what our union members have told us, that this is not what's ideal. So, you know, we're a union. We're one of the only 2 unions that represent farm workers in Washington State. And at least farm workers in Washington State say that this is a bad deal. So that's how we're presenting it. And that's where we're going to fight for something better.
Thank you, Edgar. I really appreciate that you shed that light and, you know, helped bring more information to us on this issue. I think that's really important. There are some more issues to consider when it comes to immigration reform. So I want to turn it back to Monty to tell us a bit more about the assorted bans that non-citizens are facing.
Thank you, Emily. And thank you, Edgar. There are currently millions of non-citizens living in exile due to the temporary and permanent bans enacted against them. These policies are ones that tend to separate families and in some cases actually directly affect American citizens. It is not known how many US citizens are living in self-exile due to their spouse's immigration status. Here to tell us more about what this is like, we have Nicole Salgado.
Thank you so much, Monty. And thank you to Martha, McDevitt, Onelika, and Democrats Abroad for including me in this incredibly important discussion. I'm so honored. I'm equally excited about this promising moment, and I'm also aware of how much we have to learn and do. And today, instead of doing a reading, as I often do, I'll just encourage you to take advantage of our free Kindle version of our book today and tomorrow if you don't have a copy yet. And I wanted to start my part with a little reflection on a memory from the book from New Year's 2011, which is about 10 years ago. And it's 3 words, but you're married. Has this ever crossed your mind to ask someone about their or their spouse's immigration status? Or have you ever been asked this yourself? If so, you're not alone. The barriers faced by mixed status couples are some of the least understood, but biggest collateral damage of immigration law. Too many people, including couples themselves, assume that marrying a US citizen means automatic legalization, but that's simply not true. And it's the reason I've been exiled in Mexico for 15 years. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our book focuses on the stories of 12 couples whose lives were changed by immigration law, some more than others. My story starts with the first 12 years with my husband, my upbringing in upstate New York, my college years, my environmental activism, my relocation to California, and becoming a conservation and educational professional. Next slide, please. I can't actually see the slides, so. I'll just go ahead and continue. Our story also tells in great detail how I met, fell in love with, and married Margarito from Querétaro, Mexico, who at the time was a undocumented construction worker, and the roller coaster of discovering his immigration barriers. Margot actually had what's called a permanent ban, literally for one entry without authorization, removal, and having gone back and lived in California for 1 year. His only route, we're on the third slide, thank you. His only route to legal status was to leave the country. And after 10 years, he could apply for a waiver of his permanent bar to qualify for a visa. So as you can imagine, we spent over 4 years in fear. I became politically alienated from my country to a certain degree. And we had to come to terms with our options. Next slide, please. So despite both of us having enjoyable, lucrative jobs, we eventually chose to leave on our own terms. And in our book, it pulls back the curtain on my first 6 or so years in Mexico and the impacts that it had on me, our marriage, our family, my career, and my health. It describes the joys and tragedies of exile, which were both unique, but also identical to the experiences of hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of exiled Americans, and even more of anyone who once called the US home. In being forced to make an indefinite home abroad, cultural adjustments were intense. I became a mother and a Mexican citizen after 4 years here, and that took all of our challenges to the next level. Next slide, please. The year before my daughter was born, I envisioned telling an immigration story. And soon after, my good friend Nathaniel Hoffman contacted me about an immigration book concept that he had, which led us to co-write and edit Amor in Exile. And by that time, we were about halfway through our 10-year time capsule. It was hard at first to raise my voice on this issue and bear publicly what my husband and I had suffered. I feared stigma, trolling, even retribution. But I'm so grateful to this day for Nate's shared vision on humane immigration reform and the editorial and communicative talents that he's lent this project ever since, which has really opened the door for me to find and share my authentic voice. Now, there isn't a day that I take my privileges for granted, especially when so many people continue to be silenced. We timed our publication with the release of the Gang of Eight's Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill in 2013. We crowdfunded to deliver Amor in Exile to every congressperson. We had readings all over the US and Mexico. We met and allied with fellow exiles or families underground in the US. The bill was ill-fated at the time it died in the House. We pressed on and kept speaking out. I discovered an organization named American Families United that lobbied for families like ours. And it's been tragic to come to grips with our numbers, bittersweet to meet so many beautiful and afflicted families and amplify others' voices, and I wouldn't trade it for anything, but we still had a long road ahead. Before we knew it, the 10-year time capsule was up. It was 2016 and Trump had been elected. More bans ensued. We had no savings, so we hesitated. And when we realized it could be now or never, we retained lawyer Laura Fernandez and filed our I-130. Once it was approved, we finally decided to crowdfund to cover the rest of our expenses. Thanks to our modest savings and the generosity of friends and family, we took the step of packing 15 years of heartache and upstanding character into a 250+ page I-212 waiver, which shockingly was approved in 4 months. But 13 months later, again, in the whirlwind fall of 2019, Margot was diagnosed with hyperthyroid, started treatment, passed his medical exam, his biometrics, and then we traveled to Ciudad Juarez for his interview. 2 good friends who had just left exile the year before us coached us. After all that, the consular agent denied Margot's visa, saying he needed an I-212 waiver. I can only imagine her face when he pulled out his I-797 notice of approval from his binder. She disappeared to verify the file while Margot stood there sweating buckets of dread alongside at least 70 other souls awaiting their fates. Eventually, she came back and unapologetically swapped his blue slip for a green one, and our wait was over. It had been 18 years. So though the legal bonds of exile were resolved, many emotional, professional, and relationship impacts remain. Transitioning our family of 3 has proved much harder than expected. You might think that it's all good, but it takes time to rebuild after letting go of so much. Even in a good year with good support systems free of COVID and insurrections, traumas linger. They manifest as beliefs, behaviors, physical disorders, whether fleeting or ongoing. Memories can trigger, as does reading about or hearing anti-immigrant rhetoric. More intense events can be devastating. Up until this point, I've spoken for myself, but these things affect all our communities, family members, and children. I couldn't include their pictures here, but I have good friends who've lived through these things or worse, and they've suffered. So we're not alone in needing to continually gather our strength, regroup, and recenter. If exile has taught me anything, it's how and why to find joy in the present, regardless of the circumstances. So we plant seeds, we hang bird baths, we paint, we step into the forest for the trees. Choosing the present also meant getting out the vote last fall. When we crossed the border last month, it struck me harder than ever that immigration law is something like a dam that holds back the natural movement of life. Maybe because it was my first time by car, or maybe because I saw the fences and makeshift camps in the riparian forests of one of the biggest river systems in North America. As a humanist and as an ecologist, just as the environmental movement raises its voice for the earth, I believe we must now raise our voices and take action for fellow humans who can't move freely, who can't go public or pay the retainer or go to the consulate, or who just don't know where to turn. So, and who will come after them? I know from experience that for each of us to be fine, we must all be fine. So please tell your congresspeople, in addition to supporting current immigration reform bills, to also include mixed status families, or to vote on the American Families United Act. As strategic as it may be to move forward with piecemeal legislation, we must always remain conscious of who's left out. Comprehensive immigration reform is still on the table with the Citizenship Act. Again, thank you all for coming, and reminder to download the free ebook, visit all our websites so you can see what you can do to help. And thank you again to those who made this possible.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you for sharing this really personal and emotional story with us and shedding light on, everything that this does to families, and especially the physical and emotional toll that I'm sure many of us aren't aware of. So thank you. If you want to find out more about Nicole's experience, as she's mentioned, she's kindly provided the Kindle version of her book that's free for download. You can find the link in the chat, and you'll receive it in the follow-up email if you RSVP'd for this event. Now we want to move on to our Q&A session. So if you have questions and you haven't already, feel free to add those in the Q&A box that we have, and we will start working our way through them. I think just to get this going, one of the questions we got is the dreamer status just for people in limbo, or does this encompass a more broad range definition? And also, how are you all feeling? Are you feeling bitter about America or grateful for the education and the cause?
I'd be happy to answer the question on the dreamer status. So the dreamer status encompasses people who are currently a DACA recipient, or those who have, I need to double check the language of the Dream and Promise Act, but it is those who entered the US before the age of 18, stayed here continuously for a certain amount of years. There's like a continuous presence test in the text, but it basically encompasses DACA recipients and dreamers who arrived before the age of 18. I'll take a look at the text of the language later. But in terms of the second question, are you bitter about America or grateful for your education and cause? I'm very much grateful for my education. I'm very much grateful for my upbringing. I am frustrated about the politics, how people are being used as pawns, how the fact that in 2010, the DREAM Act had 55 votes in the Senate, but it was 5 votes shy of being filibuster proof. I'm tired of the politicization of people who just want a better life. That's the underlying frustration, I would say. And thank you, Dan, for your question.
So next, I think we have two questions for Edgar. First, thank you for sharing your very important perspective on some of the legislation that might seriously negatively impact farm workers. Would you share what kind of farm worker legislation you would propose instead of what's being considered? And then there's a second question for you after.
Yeah, so like I said, I mean, the ideal thing or the right thing to do would be to do blanket amnesty for everyone. Not just, I mean, I'm not even just farm workers, just for everyone, I think. But from the perspective of farm workers, that's our immigration reform. That's just amnesty, like straight out. You know, not only because we've worked throughout the COVID crisis and never stopped working, but just because of all the work and everything that we've done for the agricultural industry and for the country. I think that should be rewarded somehow. You know, and it's not like this crazy idea. In 1986, Ronald Reagan got amnesty through. So he's like a big conservative icon. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's the starting point of how we should, that's the thing that we should be fighting for. There's also, it's not so much a bill but there is this thing called the Dignity Campaign that we've been really advocating for since more than 2010 or something like that. And it came out of people's movement assemblies and house meetings with workers. And it just came out with like 10 points of like priorities in the immigrant community. So there's this thing, I think it's online, just called like Dignity Campaign. And it's really, really good. I mean, that's our model legislation. Was there another question?
Yeah, we have a question about if you could speak more about Cesar Chavez and his legacy for farm workers.
Yeah, and it's almost gonna be his birthday on March 31st. So, you know, I think the legacy of Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers, Dolores Huerta, a lot of people don't know that the farm worker movement started with Filipino workers, farm workers in California. So, you know, their fight also, I think that legacy they left and for us, you know, it's very historical, and it's one of the only, you know, it's kind of sad, it's one of the only examples that we've had historically to show us how to fight back. Hopefully that now in this time we're seeing more farm workers organizing themselves, self-organizing. There isn't, I mean, our union is an independent union. It's not, you know, our ambition isn't to go like represent every farm worker across the whole United States. I'm seeing more of a trend of like more localized organizing happening that has more of an impact than a big national campaign, but we're sharing some values, I think. But Cesar Chavez and the UFW and what they've done really gives us a lot of stuff to build off of. You know, we're still fighting to end pesticides. We're barely going to get overtime in Washington State. Paid rest breaks, bathrooms in the field. So these are like things that the UFW fought for in California. And those are like little things that you can still fight for, and use that examples that we can still do these little things, but also, you know, try to change the big structural things that are, you know, we were written out of the New Deal in the 30s that protected workers. So, but domestic workers and farm workers got left out. So those are things that we're still continuing to fight for this modern day era generation of farm workers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This next question is for all the panelists. Could you mention or repeat a campaign that requires immediate, urgent support right now that we can support? Unsuk, maybe you can start us off.
Sure. So I guess one of the things that we can all take in action now is, of course, call individual like local Congress members or senates to just raise the story, raise awareness, and notify them the reality of the situation, so that they can potentially add on to support towards change, towards what we're all looking for.
Thanks. Maybe Tawheeda or Nicole, do you want to add anything as well?
I will add that I will echo Jason's point that that U.S. citizens should continue to pressure both their Congress, both their representative and their senators. I did find for the most part, when it comes to my friends' advocacies, a lot of senators and Congress people do have a contact us page, but there are ways to reach out to staffers. There's this one website called Legistorm where you can reach out to actual staffers and email them by making sure that your concern gets to them. So I would definitely recommend being persistent, constantly annoying senators and your representatives.
Thanks. Nicole.
Thank you. Yes. So the lobbying organization that is supporting our community is American Families United, and there is a bill that was sponsored by Representative Veronica Escobar. We need more co-sponsors, and we need it to be brought to a vote, or we need to be included in the Senate versions of the bills that were just passed. And I mentioned that in the Q&A. But again, I do believe that it has a lot to do with the question that I posed early on in my talk, is that I do believe that there just isn't enough understanding that there is such a large, up to 2 million of us affected in this community. So it's really, really important that you please let your congresspeople know about that and make sure that we're not left out.
Thanks, Nicole. Brooke, I think you got the next question.
Okay. So this question probably actually pertains to you again, Nicole, but anybody should feel free to answer. So Eileen asks, beginning with a bit of an anecdote, even with legal status, the process for getting a green card for a spouse is cruel. My brother-in-law has been in Canada applying for a green card for 6 weeks. He's already been conditionally approved, but cannot return to the US until the approval is final. Do you know if there's any, or if any of the legislation would address the bureaucratic hurdles that are put in place to make the process more difficult?
Well, I believe that that is precisely the kind of thing that is addressed in the AFU Act, is that it would reduce the necessity for individuals to leave the country before they're able to adjust their status, because that's when they get slapped with, certain statutes. I don't know the ins and outs of each specific legislative package, but I have recommended to Democrats abroad that they bring back on in the future of their series, perhaps one of the legislative experts from our organization, so that they can talk a little bit more about the ins and outs. I just wanted to focus on the personal story and try to bring some broader awareness to the issue. But there definitely is a lot that can be done specifically, and the organization is definitely very aware of that burden, which in my case ended up being 15 years out of the country.
Thank you.
Well, with that, we are nearing the end of our time, so we want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you for your questions. Thank you to our speakers. Just to kind of wrap up, if you RSVP'd for the event, we will be sharing with you a list of actions that you can take, which we have called the Dream With Us Challenge. This will include a 30-day challenge of actions and reading you can partake in individually or as a group. We can attain a better future for undocumented and non-citizen individuals alike, but it will require all of us to use our voices in unison. We want to thank everyone for being here tonight to attend our event, and we hope that it has given everyone both the motivation and the tools to champion this fight. As a reminder to everyone on the call, please make sure you're registered or you have requested your absentee ballot or registered to vote this year. There are a few elections taking place in multiple states, including some special elections, so don't risk it. Make sure you go to votefromabroad.org to request your absentee ballots. We hope everyone enjoyed this event as much as we did. Of course, it's never too late to get involved. You can find the Dream With Us challenge in the chat. And we'll send out a short reminder to all those that RSVP. You can also consider volunteering with Democrats Abroad. Just need to go to democratsabroad.org/volunteer. And of course, we always welcome first-time volunteers. With that, we're going to end the call. I want to thank our great speakers, Tawheeda, Unsuk, Edgar, and Nicole, and everyone who took the time to join our event. So thank you again. Everyone stay safe, be healthy, and we hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much for sharing. We all appreciated it.
And thank you as well to Muncie for this incredible effort to bring us all together. This would not have happened without you, and you did an amazing job.
Thank you so much, everyone. I really hope that everyone is really motivated. And I know that there are a lot of issues that we have to keep fighting for. And it sounds really tough, and we don't have enough support yet. But I personally believe that we're going to be able to do this within the next 10 years, or as long as it takes. I'm fully motivated to keep fighting for this. We need to fight for farm workers. We need to fight for all undocumented immigrants, people living in exile, dreamers, all of us.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. With that, I will close the Zoom.